Now, this had took place a few years ago. This was back in 2018 when my friend Rachel was spending time with her dad. To make it a long story short, her parents had a divorce, so every other weekend was when Rachel would visit her dad. So she was pretty much, out of college at the time, and she was going to see her dad for Father's Day, as he doesn't really get to see Rachel very much since she was in college, but now that she's out for the summer, she was finally able to go see her dad. Now, she arrived there on Friday, and her father had suggested that they go to the movies together. Of course, Rachel didn't feel like going to the movies, said that they should go for a drive somewhere. They decided to take a drive up to the countryside and take some pictures and stuff. So that's when they started driving. It was on Father's Day, and they drove on a pretty busy road. While they were driving, they ended up stopping at a nearby gas station to get some gas. However, Rachel ends up being on her phone for a bit, just mainly texting her boyfriend and texting a few of her friends. She ends up looking up and seeing that there was a man that she's never seen before. He looked really older, maybe around his 60s, and he looked really gruff. She tried her best to ignore him as best as she could, but for whatever reason, something just stuck with her that obviously she couldn't shake off the feeling. Whatever it was, it definitely was pretty much unsettling, and Rachel had no idea what she should even say. She stared at this man, and this man eventually looked up and stared back at her. Now, she got a little carried away, and she ends up praying to God that this guy didn't come over. Now, her dad was filling up the gas on the car, so he ends up taking his time to go inside the store to get a few things. Rachel was just sitting there, and this man walks up to her window. As he was there, he gave her a really creepy smile. This was somewhat during the evening when the sun was starting to go down, and that was when Rachel and her dad were on their way back from their hike in the countryside. Of course, Rachel tried to ignore this man, but this man started knocking on the window, saying, can you let me in? As he asks this, Rachel honestly wasn't sure if she should text her dad or she should call 911 because the guy was standing right there, monitoring her every move. He ended up trying to bang on the glass as hard as he could, trying to get her to let go. Eventually, the door was locked, so the man tried to pull on the door. That was when her dad arrived back and said, "Hey, who are you?" As he said this guy ended up taking off and running out and hiding behind the building. He ends up calling the police, and the police eventually arrest this man. As it turns out, this man had been wanted for laundering during gas stations, and this had happened for quite some time. It was obviously a really disturbing discovery, but this man was certainly really creepy. Now, this guy, I'm not really too sure what to think, but Rachel was obviously very petrified about this man. What was this man wanting to do with Rachel, and what would he have done if he got into her car? That still really haunts her to this day. That was the only Father's Day she had that was really messed up. But nothing like that has ever happened since. And she still is glad that her dad came out just in time because what could have happened to her if she had not alerted her dad? My friend Christina used to go to Dave and Buster's when she was living with her dad at the time of the story. This was sometime around 2016, and Christina was living with her dad as her mom unfortunately had died due to epilepsy. This is when her dad took her in. Christina really liked spending time with her dad, And since she was the only child, she got what she wanted. She was kind of a bit of a spoiled brat at times, but of course her father did spend as much time with her as he could. However, it was on Father's Day and she decided to take him to Dave and Buster's. For those of you guys who don't know what Dave and Buster's is, it's a pretty much an arcade for teens and adults. Kind of similar to, Chuck E. Cheese, but except it's a little different than Chuck E. Cheese. Dave and Buster's was a pretty good place, and they did have lots of games. So Christina and her father ended up going to play some games, and as they went to Dave and Buster's, they started playing all the games that were available. The arcade game was amazing. They even had fun spending time playing on certain games. However, that's when she ends up seeing that she needed to use the bathroom. Now, that's when Christina told her dad that she was going to go use the bathroom, and he ended up saying, "Okay." She goes to the bathroom, and all of a sudden she suddenly felt cold. It obviously was really strange, and she wasn't sure what it was, but she all of a sudden felt very cold. She tried her best to put her sweater on, thinking maybe that might help, but the weirdest thing is that it was summertime, so it wasn't supposed to be very cold. She ends up looking over and seeing that there was something out there. There was what appeared to be outside the bathroom a man, but however, when she looked away for a second, he was gone, and she was obviously kind of confused as to why this guy was appearing there and why did he disappear. She decides to shrug it off and ignore it and decided to continue to do her business and then came out of the bathroom. Once she came out of the bathroom, she ended up going over towards where she ends up going towards where her dad was in one of the games and the human claw machine, and they ended up going and having fun in that game. As Christina was doing her best, she ended up looking up to see that man again. However, this man was waving to her. She didn't understand why he was waving, but something deep inside her told her that there was something very off about that man. She told her dad about it, and of course, her dad ended up alerting the security and employees, and they searched the whole in Dave and Buster's. They didn't see that man. Whatever Christina was convinced of what she experienced that day was completely paranormal. It still frightens her to this day knowing that this man was there, but there was no backstory as to if this man was ever dead or was he missing and never returned. That was one of the questions and furies that she had. She still goes to Dave and Buster's with her dad every Father's Day to spend some time. But however, they never really had too much going on at Dave and Buster's. They didn't experience anything paranormal then that day. Maybe a few dirty looks for some weird guys, but other than that, nothing like that has ever happened since. On Father's Day of 2020, this happened to one of my friends at the time. This was just during the global pandemic when it was really bad going on. Now, to give it a long story short, my friend, which we will call her her Macy at the sake of the story. Macy was living with her parents and it was Father's Day. So since she didn't have anything going on, they didn't do anything too much since the lockdown was going on. But her dad said that they would order pizza. That's when her she gets excited knowing that pizza day was one of the best days that she's ever had. Every every Father's Day they have pizza and they do have pizza on Fridays, but for some reason her dad was in the mood for pizza. He ends up ordering some pizza and some wings and some fries and got everyone a dessert. Now, Macy had a younger brother who was maybe around 18 at the time, and she was the oldest since Macy was 24. Now, that's when, and and they were all playing a board game when all of a sudden they heard a knock at the door. Now, Macy was kind of confused, so she ended up going over to see if it was the pizza man. But however, as she ends up looking, but there was nobody at the door. It was very strange, she thought. She ends up saying that it was probably some ding-dong ditcher. They continued to play the game when all of a sudden the knock happened again. This time her dad got up and answered. When her dad got up and answered the door, there was the pizza guy, and he delivered the pizza and he paid for it and took it back in the house. As they were all eating pizza, that's when Macy ends up looking up to see that there was a shadow peeping inside the living room from the living room window. Honestly, she freaked out, and she had no idea what was going on, but she was getting very nervous by the minute. She ends up screaming, and her dad runs in, and he asks her what's wrong. Of course, the brother said that there was someone outside. That's when her dad ends up getting out his shotgun, and he ends up trying to scare it off, saying that he is armed and that this man or whoever it was needs to leave the property. However, this figure was just staring at him as if he didn't acknowledge him. He just stared directly at him for what seemed like a dead stare. That's when Macy ends up calling 911, and this figure ends up running to another window, this time by the kitchen when the mother was pretty much cleaning dishes. She ends up freaking out, seeing that this figure was staring at her from the kitchen window. That's when Macy's dad goes over there. And when he's over there, he points the gun, and it turns out it was a man. This man looked to be, maybe he had cerebral palsy, and he didn't look very friendly. He ends up saying, "Can I use your bathroom?" Of course, that's when Macy's father said to him to get off the property or he called the police. Sirens were alerted in the distance, and this man takes off running down into the woods, deep in the woods. As he ran into the woods, the police searched the area, but they couldn't find that man. It turns out that this man was the same one that had been trying to get into people's houses at night. He had been wanted for at least 2 months, and since then they have not found him. Now that it's been 5 years, Macy and her parents aren't sure as if the man was ever caught or not. But this is one Father's Day that Macy will never forget.